Hello everybody, this is Albert with Green Tea House. I hope you're doing well today. Today we're going to talk about some mistakes that people do when storing their tea and how ultimately this can ruin your tea. Now before we begin, if you're new to the channel, I recommend that you check out our past episodes, in particular the Fundamentals of Tea playlist, and I'll make sure I put some banners up here for some episodes that are germane to this. How to store your tea. A lot of people don't think about this, especially if you come from a world of drinking tea packets. You just cut open the tea packet, throw it in a cup, and you drink it. You don't really think about it. But there are steps that you can do to optimize your loose leaf tea, and there are things that you can do that will make your tea degrade quickly. Now, most of you don't have pounds of tea in your house. You probably have just enough to drink. You're not like us who do have pounds of tea in our house. So we have to make sure that we keep it in an optimal state. So I'm going to give advice to you guys on how to keep your tea fresh and things to avoid. So tea can degrade. Now, pu'er, which is a type of dark tea, that stuff ages with age. So that's one of those teas that you really can't screw it up that much. And same for black tea. Black tea, if properly stored, can last you 2 years. Green tea, which is more delicate because it's not oxidized, really only has a healthy shelf life of 6 to 8 months. I will do an episode on the best or the worst time of the year to buy green tea or to buy tea in general. That'll be a future episode. But in general, just understand, like, when we're on the spectrum of oxidation, which makes sense because when you oxidize, you've broken down the tea leaves to the point where it's no longer as sensitive. So the more oxidized teas last longer. The least oxidized teas are more susceptible. So what are some mistakes that people make? One, I think probably the biggest one, well, I'd say the biggest one is getting your tea leaves wet before you're ready to steep them. Because if you accidentally pour water, just room temperature water on your tea leaves, you're gonna ruin them because, like we talked about before, tea when it's prepared has to be less than 5% moisture before they ship it. Because if not, you get what? The same thing we talked about on what to do with your tea leaves after you steep it. They can get mold growth or fungus growth. So you need to make sure the number one thing is don't get your tea leaves wet. But in terms of just number one kind of cardinal mistakes people make, one, not keeping them in a very good airtight container. Now, I don't expect you guys to have like sealed containers with clasp and all these things like this, but at the least, don't leave your tea open where it can be exposed to air. You want to keep it either in the bags. That's why we sell our bags with a sealable container. You want it to be sealed as much as you can because it's going to keep it fresher. So you just don't want to have them exposed to the elements, so to speak. Another mistake that people make is sunlight. Sunlight degrades your tea. So sometimes I've been to coffee shops that will sell loose leaf tea, and they'll sell them in these glass jars, and it's great for presentation to sell it and have them like right next to the cash register so they can see the tea, right? We've talked about how important it is to use all senses when it comes to your experience with tea. So looking at the teas, touching the teas and all these things. And so having them in a glass jar, like a really beautiful, I don't know, oolong or a blue flower Earl Grey, which are teas that no coffee shop sells, but like a really pretty one, like a chamomile lavender. It's very pleasing to the eyes, but sunlight degrades tea. So you want to keep tea in a dark container, preferably airtight and sealed. Sunlight will degrade it. Another thing that will degrade your tea is heat. So, for example, do not store your tea close to anything that produces heat. So namely your stove and your oven, because heat will degrade your teas, especially your very sensitive, low to no oxidized green and white teas. Heat will degrade it. Another thing, do not store your tea with any other thing that has an aroma, taste, or whatnot. So don't put it in the pantry next to your spices because tea is very delicate. You think of like jasmine green tea. One of the ways they create that is just by putting jasmine flowers next to green tea leaves, and it just naturally soaks in that flavor of the jasmine. That's what we want. But if you have it next to, I don't know, cumin, turmeric, or something like that, the same thing can happen, especially if you don't have it in a sealable container. So your tea should be stored somewhere, maybe next to your vitamins or in a place where there's no food at all. It should be in a standalone pantry with, I don't know, your envelopes. Another thing is do not refrigerate your tea leaves before usage, because tea lasts longer when it's in low humidity and colder temperatures. Refrigerator is high humidity because that's one way to keep it keeps your food fresh, but high humidity will degrade your tea leaves. So you do not want to put your unused tea leaves in there. Now I've talked about like if you've steeped some tea and you maybe can't re-steep for like another hour or two, then get those wet tea leaves and put them in the refrigerator, sure. But overall, unused tea, you should not store in the refrigerator. Ideal tea likes a low temperature, 50 to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, preferably in a dark place, dark room, and low humidity, preferably in an airtight container. Those are the ideals. And even there, like if you're storing all your tea together, I would tell you, if you be really kind of persnickety about it, don't store your green teas next to your black teas, because even then the aromas can diffuse. Not as much if you have, of course, in a sealable container, but I would kind of keep your greens and your whites together, and then your kind of darks, not that you have maybe a wide variety of these teas, but your darks and your pu'ers together. Keep them like the Capulets and the Montagues, keep them separate. So that's what you should do. So those are the things that you should not do. So what should you do? Like I mentioned, buy a limited amount of tea because it's going to be fresher. Buy small amounts of tea because then that tea will be fresher and you consume it quicker. And then airtight containers, dark containers. And we'll talk about in a future episode, buy your tea in season, just like fruit and other things, and it'll be fresher. And in closing, green tea, remember, can get, I wouldn't say bad. It doesn't like get bad to the fact that you get sick or anything like that. It just loses its potency and its taste if it's longer than 6 months. But something like black tea and the pu'er teas and the dark oxidized oolong teas, and I would say the herbals really don't degrade that much, the tisanes, you can have those for a long time. Guys, I hope this helps. Post in the comments. Let me know how you store your tea. Until next time, take care and God bless.